All right, we're going to get started. We have two papers today that we're discussing. One is about Amazon and self-preferencing. The other is about Airbnb and how regulations affect default rates on mortgages and other kinds of debt. Before we dive into that and talk about our key themes, we'll introduce our panelists. I'm Kate Rocco, a partner at Latham and Antitrust. Chiara?
Hi, I'm Chiara Farronato. I am faculty at Harvard Business School.
I'm Senthil Veeraraghavan, faculty at Warton School.
I'm Tom McGrath. I'm an antitrust partner at Linklaters.
I'm Larry White. I'm a professor of economics at the Stern School of Business here at NYU, 4 blocks in that direction.
Hello, I'm Ting Nian. I'm an associate professor from the UC Irvine, the Pomeroy School of Business. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so before we dive into our two papers, I want to set the stage today with a couple of questions for us to think about as we listen to the presentations. So first, regarding Amazon, while self-preferencing may harm individual vendors, what does it do to consumers? What does it do to consumer welfare? How do we balance the harm to one side of the market, the third-party vendors who may miss out on a sale, with benefits to the other side of the market, consumers who may like and want to buy cheap tennis socks from the Amazon brand? Same for Airbnb, another two-sided market. How do short-term rentals affect hotel prices, rental prices, home purchase prices, and home ownership? What is the correct amount of regulation for Airbnb in light of housing supply and pricing issues? Okay, turning first to Amazon. Chiara, you want to kick us off?
All right, I'm excited. Thank you to everybody who decided to stay until 4 p.m. on Friday. Hopefully this is going to be an interesting panel. And thank you to the discussants of my non-paper, because for now it's a work in progress with a lot of slides, but not a lot of words. All right, so let me start setting the stage. This is joint work with a couple of co-authors, Andre Fradkin and Alex McKay. And we're really studying vertical integration in a platform environment. Why do we care about that? Well, we care about that because, as Laura said just in the prior session, we're at an inflection point. And as an empirical economist, this is an incredibly exciting time to study platform antitrust. The problem is how to do that, because I think we know from a theoretical perspective the various trade-offs that exist when we have large versus small platforms versus, one dominant platform versus many smaller platforms. But we actually need to really quantify the net benefits. Where does the pendulum swing? And in theory, platforms have a ton of information. They are really information aggregators. And so they have plenty of data to look at. The problem is that I would really challenge you to go and knock on Amazon's door and say, hey, I want to study whether you preference your products on your platform. If they say no, well, you can't study it with their collaboration. And if they say yes, I would also question that yes, because there's obviously a self-interest in the type of research that these companies facilitate. So to try and get to quantifying the trade-offs of various questions, what I've been spending a lot of time in the last couple of years doing is what we call WebMonk. It's kind of a chipmunk that collects web data. How many of you in the room have an ad blocker installed on their browser? There's a bunch of you. So WebMonk is nothing more than an ad blocker, okay, that we have developed for online studies. And it has 3 main characteristics that we can use to ask questions that have antitrust and policy implications. The first one is that it can manipulate your browsing experience, just like an ad blocker blocks the ads that you would be able to see on the web browser. Our extension has the ability to block certain types of information that is available on certain websites. And I'll tell you more specifically what we block for this study in a second. What it also is able to do is tracking your browsing behavior. So for example, we know what kind of searches you've conducted on Amazon.com and what kind of results did you see, and also how those results were ordered. Not just that, but also how you interacted with those products, whether you clicked on them, whether you eventually purchased them. And finally, we can actually, just like an ad blocker that may have a pop-up window that asks you to do certain things, we can actually prompt users to complete additional tasks like filling surveys and things like that. You can actually go to webmonk.org and see a little bit more about this technology. And so we can use it for a bunch of things, but in this particular study, what are we using it for? Well, we're using it to try and understand what is the effect of Amazon offering their own brands that compete with third-party brands and unbranded products on consumer choices. Many of you may be familiar with Amazon Essentials, with Amazon Basics, with Solimo. There's a ton of Amazon brands that are now actually competing directly with third-party products. And so we want to try and identify what happens to consumers' choices if we were exogenously able to remove those products from their choice set, okay? And the second and related question is whether the effect that we find is driven by Amazon potentially unfairly privileging its own products. So whether Amazon is actually engaging in self-preferencing on the platform, okay? So how do we use Webmonk, our technology, to do this? Well, we can recruit participants. We actually use Facebook to recruit these participants. We pay them some money and we ask them to keep the extension installed for a few weeks. They're all US based. We have IRB approvals from Harvard. And we randomize about 1,200 participants into 3 groups. Okay, the first group is what you see as the control group. These are people for whom we just track their behavior online, okay? Then we have an Amazon treatment group up at the top where we can actually identify through Webmonk which products carry an Amazon brand, and we can pretty instantaneously remove them from their search results. So it's not that they see a hole in the search results, but actually the HTML page reorganizes itself so that those products don't appear and those holes don't appear in the user's searches. And then we have a third treatment, the random treatment group, where we actually remove a subset of the products, a random subset of the products. That subset is equal to the number of Amazon branded products that would appear on the search, okay? And this is to try and understand, well, if we compared, these control group with the treatment group, well, we can see the effect of removing Amazon brand, but we can make sure that the effect is not driven simply by a reduction in sort of product variety by having this additional third group, okay? So it's the first time I present results without tables, but here we go. I'm gonna try. So the first finding is that if we compare users who don't see Amazon products with users who see Amazon products in their choice sets, in their search results, well, the choices that consumers without Amazon brands make have very similar prices, okay? The only big difference actually is that the alternative product, so the substitute product in the absence of Amazon, is one that is much less reviewed, okay? So presumably much less frequently bought as well by the consumers, okay? The second thing is whether this effect is driven by Amazon unfairly privileging its own products. Well, Amazon's products turn out to be better on observable characteristics than the average alternative on search results. So they are cheaper, they get delivered faster, they have more reviews, so they are observably better, but even conditioning on those observable characteristics, they seem to be prioritized in search results, okay? So they seem to have a higher priority in search results. Yet, what we find is that that prioritization is really not the results of self-preferencing. When we condition on having the same rank, actually Amazon branded products seem to be equally likely, if not more likely, to be purchased by consumers as a product that has the same rank, but doesn't carry an Amazon brand. So with this, I'm gonna give it to Senthil. Thank you for trying to discuss a paper that doesn't exist.
Thank you. So I lost the opportunity to say I love the paper, but I have to honestly say this is a lot of work to go and get up the website running and do the self-referencing, because this is a question that a lot of people pose, that Amazon is self-referencing their own products and taking over third-party products with their own brands, and that's destroying perhaps consumer welfare a little bit, and also definitely changing the dispersion of the supplier competition upstream. A lot of Chiara's work is actually looking at the consumer side as well. So we are the two operations people maybe in the room. Although Chiara is also an economist. I'm not an economist, I'm not a law scholar, so I'm actually going to expand it to kind of talking about some of the supply side problems. Let me see if the slides work. That's still me, I suppose, very younger me. Oh, my slides aren't there?
Send them this morning.
Did you send them to me?
I send them to Danny, I suppose. Okay, all right. I go with the slides. It's okay. Yep. Can you?
You did try to preempt this issue.
Yeah. Sorry, we did try. Yeah, we did try. Chiara has the slides, and yeah, can you send them? Yeah. So I have it here. Can you tell me your last name? Yeah, you can just. Sorry, Chiara. So I sent it to everybody except you. It looks like yeah. Maybe Chiara can say a couple of things additionally as we wait here.
No, I'm excited to hear what you're going to say, because you're going to be focusing on the supply, as I understand it, and Kate was really trying to balance, the results that we see on consumers with the potential impact that these vertical integration has on supply. So
Yeah, and I had one question for you, Chiara.
yes, okay.
Can you elaborate on your findings that in the absence of Amazon brands, people tend to find fairly similar alternatives, except that they have much lower number of reviews? And I also just wanted to open up the discussion about the importance of a good review and also the number of reviews. Two products similarly priced and apparently similar in quality. How significant is it to have more reviews?
Yeah, so actually, I would argue that number of reviews, because we have a lot of sort of rating inflation, number of reviews is actually a very strong indicator or signal that consumers take into account, but that it can easily be manipulated by Amazon in principle, because it's a function of how many people buy the product. And so if Amazon were to maybe at the beginning start giving an initial advantage to its own products, those may start getting more reviews relative to very similar non-branded, non-Amazon branded products. And that may lead to sort of a virtuous cycle for the Amazon brand and not for the other products, that lead to a really large discrepancy in the number of reviews. We can't really test whether that's going on. What we know is that at a cross-sectional level, so today, right, the Amazon branded products are not really self-preferenced. I think one thing that's important to note is that Amazon branded products enter a specific subset of the categories that exist of products on Amazon, and these categories tend to be sort of commodity type of products, right? where, it's rice, it's toilet paper, where, the product, the problem of, maybe killing or disincentivizing innovation and entry by third-party sellers may not be as high relative to the benefits of competition that reduces prices and benefits consumers. These results may be very likely to hold in that type of products, in those type of commodity products, less likely to hold in, the leather bag, for example. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiara, for setting this up on the fly. Chiara got to summarize a little bit of the findings, so I just put it up. Basically, there is no evidence of self-referencing going on, controlling for quality and other aspects. I think this is an interesting question because Amazon's market share, people are worried about the market share, size of the Amazon market share. I love showing this slide to people. It's an old slide from Benedict Evans. Even asking a very straightforward question like, what's Amazon's market share is hard to answer. Because they're like 35% on e-commerce, only 7% on like addressable, larger omni-channel commerce, e-commerce and brick and mortar commerce. And but general problem is U.S. consumer market, e-commerce market size in Amazon has been growing. And that's why these questions are existent. And this is a great question because Amazon doesn't itself provide data for researchers to answer these kind of excellent questions. So I wanted to just spin a little bit on who are the suppliers that we are talking about. I just want to show you a list of Amazon private brands. Sorry, the slide isn't big enough because the number of brands has been exploding, and they actually take into account a lot of brands, maybe 25. I don't remember exact number from the experiment. There's like 75 brands I found, and some of them are like confirmed Amazon brands from their annual reports. But the question becomes like, how do you, like, what are they self-preferencing? Is it on Amazon, like Amazon basic brands, or like something like Solimo, which you have, but then there is a whole set of brands which look like third-party brands, but could be Amazon brands. But the fun thing about it is even consumers don't know that it's Amazon brand. So that's a question that's out there. These kind of questions are harder to answer. So this is a really challenging question that the researchers have taken up. The second point I wanted to answer is even if they're doing self-referencing, it's a question that goes back to marketing. In brick and mortar, private labels are always pushed forward on the shelf, and there's a statement called eye level is buy level. I don't know if you've heard of it. So it's very common that if you walk into like Molly Stone's or like a Giant or somewhere in the West Coast, and you'll see their own brands being preferentially placed up on the shelf level. That is possibly what's happening online. So it's a question of whether even controlling for all of this, if there is self-referencing going on, is that a bad thing or is it an unusual thing? So I'm not a law scholar, so I just want to post that question up, and maybe I just want to show you the supplier location distribution because I am interested in global supply chains. I talk about this a lot. If you look at like month by month growth of supplier locations of third-party suppliers in the US, because we heard a lot of panelists talking about antitrust history in the US, and a lot of it is focused on the US history, you'll see that increasingly a large majority of the location of the third-party suppliers is in China. This is amazing because if you think about your buying and clicking, it's coming from some distant location. And I just, maybe you can read it off, a significant proportion of, it's just not US market. Every market you look at in the world, that majority, increasingly higher proportion of the third-party suppliers are coming from China, which is funny because Amazon cannot penetrate the market in China, e-commerce market in China. So this is kind of a cool story. So I looked up this data, and you say it ends at 2021. So what happened in 2023? In looking up last year's financial reports, Amazon actually said it grew by another 10%. In fact, the third-party suppliers who are making more than 10 million grew a lot. 30% or something like that. Just want to show you. In fact, are they doing predatory pricing? Because this is like a one big discussion in neo-brandist kind of antitrust scholars. Just want to say, if you look for the search term, how to buy an Alibaba and sell in Amazon and make money, this has got 24 million hits. And there's a ton of businesses which are now buying from third-party suppliers in China and selling it on Amazon. So if you're looking for supplier welfare and you're worried about domestic U.S. market for domestic U.S. consumers, and wanted to take care of the two sides of the market, and so not just the consumer welfare standard, but other standards, maybe competition or market power or whatnot, we just actually know a couple of things. It's a super globalized supplier distribution, and increasingly becoming international. And the third thing is the prices are so low internationally that it's not even clear Amazon platform has the lowest prices out there. And then there is self-referencing, which may or may not be acceptable, and there's not enough evidence yet. And so interesting things happening in the space. I want to stop there. Maybe that's just a layout of the land. So thank you. Excellent, like a thought-provoking question.
So I have a question for Tom. Tom, self-preferencing has been a focus for the FTC chair, Lina Khan, and also an issue in numerous big recent tech cases, including Epic Games versus Apple. How do antitrust lawyers think about self-preferencing?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think first thing I would say is, Chiara, this is a really cool tool. I mean, it is really neat the way you can dive into the open public website and start to extract some data out of it and see what's going on. And that's great for antitrust lawyers, because when we're looking at these questions, we're talking to clients about whether they're going to get sued, whether they're going to win. And so we start thinking about evidence and what the evidence is going to show, including the economic evidence and whatever data we can find about what's really going on. I was going to say that, self-preferencing is really just the first step. As Eleanor was saying, is it an epithet? Self-preferencing these days is bad once you say it. But Chiara and Senthil did a lot of the extra work that goes on beyond that. So when you're looking at self-preferencing from an antitrust perspective, you're usually thinking about a monopolization claim. So what does that mean? You need to have a relevant market. You need to show market power. And market power in this context is usually defined as the power to increase prices or exclude competitors. And exclude competitors is really the essence of where we're going in the first step. Are there smaller competitors selling batteries who are not getting chosen and are getting excluded unfairly because there is some bias in the system? And actually, interestingly, when you looked at it, Chiara, you found not sure there is a bias in the system, because it turns out that they buy comparable products. The pricing is comparable. They tend to select the ones with the greatest ratings. But we're not quite there as a matter of antitrust. And that gets the next part of the test. And, as the Supreme Court laid out in Amex, if you've got a double-sided market, there's lots of interdependencies between both sides. You can't just find that there's a harm on one side and say you're done. That's an antitrust violation. You need to look at the offsetting benefits. And here, that takes us back to consumers and whether the availability of lots of sellers through an Amazon platform is a positive, whether, therefore, choice in products is a positive, whether lower cost and presumably higher quality from the better ratings is a positive. And so, I was struck in the discussions earlier today about regulation, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, versus antitrust. Regulation is very broad. You have lots of options. There's lots of ways you can attack things from different angles. Antitrust, although I do love it, I've been doing it for a long time, and it can be very flexible, but you start with kind of a rigid question. You have to cram the problem into a claim. And so it is either a Section 2 claim or it's a Section 1 claim. I'm not going to go to Section 5, but it is something that you need to go into the elements and try to test whether what in this case, on the balance, do you have a harm? And so to some extent, that is very, so far rigid in the eras that we've experienced, where it is the consumer welfare standard that's driving it, and there is a new discussion about whether we should be considering other norms like protecting smaller competitors, increasing nascent competitors, et cetera. So I mean, I think it's a really cool tool. When I go on Amazon or Google, I always try to skip past the first couple of sponsored results. But it sounds like I might not be. Maybe that's not needed for batteries. Thank you.
I have a question. So to follow up on Thomas' point, I think the Chiara's paper focused on the consumer, but I'm worried about that. Actually, your data could show that there's an impact on the suppliers as well. Like the smaller players might fear that they are competing with the Amazon own brands, and they will exit and then go on to other platforms such as Temu. There's other e-commerce websites which they don't have they don't have to compete with the giant. So in your data set, have you tested such facts actually present? For example, there's an exit of smaller suppliers.
So first, thank you to everybody who's given comments on this paper. It's actually very insightful to see the supply side and the legal side of this. To Ting, I wish we could look at the supply side. I think to look at the supply side, you need longer run results, longer run data. We only have about 8 weeks per user. So overall, we may have 4 months total because we have a sort of a staggered recruitment process. But you'd be surprised to see how idiosyncratic consumer searches are. So we can't see the same products across many users or the same sellers across many users. So I think, at some point, if consumers want to donate data, we may be, asking people to just keep these installed, the Mozilla Raleigh initiative and do more with this. But for now, we can't.
At the danger of self-preferencing here, let me say that a student of mine and I have a paper on not looking at Amazon data, so I want to be careful extrapolating, but looking at JD data that just adoption of something like a fulfillment partnership can increase the dispersion among suppliers, and a lot of suppliers, the smaller suppliers, quit the market. So.
All right. Any questions on?
So I want to just bring up the point that Senthil also brought up, that this has been happening a lot in retail. Thank you. In brick and mortar, this has been going on forever, right? And there, the argument has almost been that, these are cheaper but lower quality products, and this is so good for the consumers. And now Amazon is doing it, and suddenly it's very questionable. So it's from a legal point of view, I guess from the legal scholars, why is this? How is this so different, and why is it suddenly a problem versus earlier it was not? Is it because of the scale of Amazon or something else?
I heard him say legal scholars, and I see some, but I am not one. Why is it a problem? I think that it's a function of the trend and where we're going. I think that I think that the accumulation or the concentration in certain markets that's been observed has caused people to focus on, what's happening at the other end of the market? And so what is happening at the smaller players, and are we creating systems, barriers to entry, or monopolists who are entrenching themselves in one way or another to exclude smaller competitors, where there is a sense that there is a value in having small competitors who have not been valued over the last 30 years, according to some. I think probably the one of the contexts that I think is the most interesting is more in the, rather than selling batteries at low cost and quality, but in the innovation space. And so the idea that if we have multiple small competitors pursuing innovation, we'll have better ideas, we'll have better progress and better innovation. And so I think that that's part of the question and the discussion and the dialogue is saying, is it really right that we should be pursuing the consumer welfare standard above all others, or do we need to value other things that generate an efficient economy and market functionality?
So then would this also then maybe translate into maybe Walmart is has a lot of market share and
Siri's going to answer you.
Safeway and Albertson and Kroger might merge, and so they are becoming big. So do you think this will then these questions will be asked of them as well?
I think it applies to a lot of markets. I think, during the pandemic when I couldn't find something at Amazon, I did go to Walmart and, that was a good alternative at the time. I think that it applies to lots of industries where there has been accumulated market share. Now, I think there still is another discussion to be had. I think the one that comes up most of mine is in biotech space. The reason why in California there's a bunch of biotechs working on innovative medicines to make lives better is because there is a big pharma company that has the wherewithal to commercialize and finish the trials and get it to market, and the profit incentive of being taken out in an acquisition is what drives that innovation. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, I think you're right. It hits lots of sectors.
Yeah, and that reference to Illumina Grail and some of the other cases, I think, is an interesting one and worth a panel in and of its own.
Thank you very much.
We had two more questions, I think. You were first and then Harry after. Go ahead.
I think one challenge of measuring, the main challenge of measuring self-preferencing is always going to be relative to what, right? And so to answer that question or to even measure that, you need to tell me what the benchmark ordering of search results is, right? Now, you have a unique ability to do that since you can manipulate the literal search results. And we pretty clearly know, like Amazon is showing the thing that is not optimal for Duracell. And we know what the optimal for Duracell search results are. It's just Duracell everywhere, right? And we know what the Amazon Basics brand optimal is. And we have some idea what, Amazon as a whole that puts some weight on basics and some weight on consumers and something else looks like. But, there is a question like, whose search results are the benchmark? And what are we even self-preferencing relative to? There's no law that says like a store has to give me the best arrangement for the consumer. That would be like pricing everything at marginal cost or something, right? But I think that's sort of what's worth thinking about, but you may have a unique ability to actually try to measure that.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We don't know, there's a multiplicity of objective functions that give rise to different rankings. I think for now, and we can do that once we put a structure into the sort of demand that we can capture. We haven't yet. For now, what we are doing is really leveraging what Walt Fogel, Aguiar, and Reimers have done in prior work to try and understand, okay, conditional on the same rank, okay, two products are put on the same rank for whatever reason, right? Is the likelihood that the Amazon brand is purchased higher or lower than the comparable product, right? If it's lower, it means that Amazon has preferenced the product because it put it on a rank where the other product is more likely to be purchased. We don't find that, but there's way more to go, and thanks for the question.
So this is really interesting. There are probably a few people who use Amazon here, but Chiara, the Federal Trade Commission's complaint against Amazon does not say that self-preferencing is monopolizing conduct, so they're avoiding Tom's issue. What they do say is that it's evidence of the exercise of monopoly power because it shows a degrading of the consumer experience. It's sort of like raising price, but instead it's degrading the product. Now, if I'm hearing what you're saying, that's just clearly wrong. Okay. That was my question. That's it.
One of the key themes for today, which is what kind of evidence do you need to prove that? And I think in court, the FTC is going to have to prove, more likely than not.
So they're not going to call Chiara.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yes,
So
with
but
that
it's very
caveat,
interesting
because
because this
because we talked about sort of bold claims. I don't want to do bold claims
Right,
and then
right,
bring them
yeah,
back.
yeah.
So
And let me jump in on this issue of what's the baseline that Chris, my colleague, raised, and come back to the retailers have been doing house brands, I don't know, at least since A&P in the 1920s and 1930s. Well, if we saw a supermarket consistently putting its brand of coffee at eye level, coming back, and Folgers all the way down at ankle level, and we saw consistently the house brand at eye level and the otherwise branded stuff down at ankle, we might start suspecting that, gee, this is systematic. But absent that, if you see the house brand of coffee next to Folgers, is this a problem?
I think one way to address some of the issues is one thing that Chiara does, and actually this is something that is there in the experiments that I want to, it's really cool and you can actually tease that apart, is looking at the fulfillment by Amazon versus partners who are just selling their own thing. And one of the things is, I bought battery on Amazon Basics, sorry. So, and it came in like next day. So it's $2, maybe they made 10 cents. So Amazon does a lot of things because they're able to cross-pool everything. And if you're Duracell, it doesn't make sense for you to do a same-day shipping of $2 battery that earns you 10 cents. So maybe there is something going on in how fulfillment works, but this is like a question out there for a lot of researchers. So.
If I can add a couple of things. One, the degrading argument is not just on self-preference, but also on sponsored results, right, on advertising. And so that I have nothing to say yet. We may have at some point because we capture which products are sponsored and not, but I can't say anything about that. I think, and then I lost my train of thought about what you were talking about. It'll come back. Yeah. Thank you, though.
So in the meantime, I think we'll pivot to talking about Airbnb, another interesting two-sided market. There are permissive regulations relating to Airbnb, and Ting Ting will talk about that, how the result can be a net positive effect to homeowners, including a reduction in default rates on both mortgage, car loans, and other kinds of debt. Ting Ting?
Thank you, Kate. Okay, so I'm really glad to be here to share the research that I have been doing. I actually, disclaimer, I started this project in 2019 and now it's still under, in the revision process. So that how long it takes before, you actually get it published. So any feedback is highly appreciated. So, at that time, I was really interested in quantifying the economic benefits of the sharing economy platforms entry, and also the impacts of the regulations. We quantify the impact using the financial, household default rates that we can get from a major U.S. credit bureau, and then we supplement that with another data set which has individual, users transaction, loan payment pattern data. So we know that how often, when did you make a payment to the auto loan, to the mortgage loan, and to the credit card? So, okay, so this is a joint work with Gina Lin and Vijay from UC Irvine. So we're in New York, so I'm sure that you are familiar with this policy, which came into effect last year in September. So New York City cracked down the Airbnb listing, so the requirement is super restrictive. So host has to be stay just throughout the the entire stay when they list out, when they host someone, and then they can only host up to 2 guests. So, and then guess what happened? There's 80% drop immediately after that in terms of the number of Airbnb listings on Airbnb in New York City. But however, there's something that they didn't, imagine, thought before, which is, think of before, which is, they actually, a lot of the Airbnb hosts went underground. So now there's a black market of short-term rental in New York City. So the hosts have to go on Facebook and Craigslist to find guests, and the guests also have to go up on Facebook and Craigslist and many other places to find a stay. So this is the unintended consequences of the of those policy. And actually, the mayor in New York City said that they will work out with the host and also engage with the community to work out a solution. So the Airbnb actually, brought, according to Airbnb, 60% of the hosts said Airbnb actually helped them to stay in the house, in the property. And then more than half of the users, hosts actually are non-traditional workers such as freelancers, the part-time workers and our students and so on. So on average in New York City, I didn't. So, sorry, this is the graph that shows the drop. And actually, the average host earns about $75,100 in New York City by listing, through the rental income. Which if you consider it, the average income, household income is $52,000 in the U.S. Then that's about 14%, which is quite significant. So after the regulation, this another similar regulation, took place on the West Coast as well. So the Palm Springs city government kept the number of unhosted stays, kept the number of rental certificates in any given neighborhood to 20%. So right after that, the housing price went free fall. So there's as much as 20 to 30% of reduction in the housing price, which is also unexpected by probably the lawmakers. So in this study, we really want to, answer 2 questions. One is that what's the economic impact of Airbnb entry? More specifically, does the additional income brought by the platform entry actually elevate the financial defaults in the U.S. for U.S. households? And also, does the liquidity generated by the Airbnb entry reduce different types of household financial defaults? And also, does the effect vary across different communities with a different type of characteristics? The second question is that what's the impact of the regulation, and whether for example, the regulation will weaken or even offset the entry, the dampening effect brought by the Airbnb entry. So as I mentioned, that the data comes from multiple sources. So the financial data at the zip code level, which included the number of delinquencies in mortgage, auto and the bank card loans from 2010 to 2018. And then we also have the Airbnb entry dates, the short-term. We also collected the regulations from government websites and the news media across 75 cities, which covers 1,400 zip codes, which were implemented before, by the end of 2018. And we also have the individual loan payment records. So this is an example, some examples of the regulation that went into effect. So for the San Francisco is the earliest city which implement the regulation, and the restriction includes that the host has to stay in the property for at least 275 days, and if you calculate the math, they can only rent up to 90 days during the year, which is stringent. And then to the contrary, for example, Seattle, which imposed a less restrictive regulation, which only require hosts to obtain license and obtain, for example, and pay and be compliant with the occupancy tax. And then the Irvine, which is where I'm from, and then guess what? The short-term rentals are completely prohibited in all residential zones. So we categorize those regulations and then categorize them into 4 different types, ranging, with varying level of restrictiveness. So the lenient one is the most lenient one is the registration and the permit, so which only ensure the safety and then make sure legalize the business of running rental on Airbnb. And the opposite is the complete ban, which is the most strict restrictive. And then in between, we have the caps on the unhosted stays. So, for example, there's a cap on the number of stays that a host can have in a year. And then zoning and the location prohibitions, which the city has a list of, for example, prohibited zones and also building lists where the short-term rentals are not allowed. So in this study, we used the different diff and then combined with the propensity score matching. We compared the zip codes with the Airbnb entry versus the with the comparable zip codes that the Airbnb did not enter. We find that there is a in general reduction in the financial delinquencies across mortgage loans, auto loans, and the bank card loans. And then if we look at the regulation impact. In the third row, you will see that the regulation actually, increased the auto loan and also the bank car loan right after it went into effect. So which means that it has an offsetting. It offsets some of the financial the positive benefits brought by the home sharing platforms. So if we look at the different types of regulations. So the most lenient one, which is the registration and then permit fees, it doesn't have a significant impact on the financial defaults, which is expected because it only legalizes even the operations on the home sharing platforms. And then the opposite is the illegal stay, which is a complete ban. So the complete ban actually has the largest effect. So after it for cities that has this type of regulation, then after regulation, there's the previous benefits were offset. So there's an increase in those loans defaults, and then the other two are in the middle, so which has some effect. Okay. So we did some heterogeneous effects because we know that different community has very different characteristics. The housing supply is different, right? And then the the demographic is different. So we look at for example, the social capital in the community, and then economic community opportunity, and then inequality, and also the ratio of investment Airbnb properties on the platform. And also we look at the federal and the state homestead exemption, and also we did look at the partition. So in general, we find that the reduction, the benefits are larger. The entry effect actually is larger for the communities which are better off in terms of socio-economic conditions. So this is actually in contrast to what our the earlier findings that we found for Uber. So Uber actually the people who benefit most from Uber actually are from the less well-off socio-economic background. Okay, so the last piece of the data is actually from the payment patterns. So the Airbnb hosts actually make more payments for mortgage loans, auto loans, credit card loans, and after they become Airbnb. So we can identify whether they, for example, receive income from an Airbnb platform. So that's the way that we compare Airbnb host versus non-Airbnb host. And we didn't find the similar pattern for Uber drivers. So when when a user become a Uber drivers, we see that they received income from Uber, but they mostly make payment to credit card loans. And after the regulation on Airbnb, on average, the host receive less income from the monthly income from Airbnb, which is not surprising. So in conclusion, we know that Airbnb has in the prior studies that the Airbnb has has brought many economic impacts on many other markets or stakeholders. So in this study, we look at in particular what's the effect of Airbnb entry on the suppliers. Does it actually help them to smooth their financial fluctuations? And then how does the regulation policy affect that? And then we also look at, for example, which are the communities that are benefiting more from the entry of home sharing platforms. So I'm looking forward to Larry's comments.
Thank you. Larry?
Great. All right. Good. All right. So there it is. And what are the basic questions? They're looking at the suppliers, okay? And trying to figure out, does Airbnb make a difference for the suppliers? And I consider it inventive, creative, to be looking at financial delinquencies as a way of getting at the welfare of the suppliers. And then further, they look at the effects of regulation on the suppliers, again, measured through financial delinquencies. And I'm not trying to beat up on the paper, but just to clarify, it doesn't look at the effects of pricing of short-term rentals. It doesn't look at the effects on rivals to Airbnb, and it doesn't look at the externalities. These are a lot of things that may otherwise be interesting, especially these externality issues or the antitrust type things. They're just trying to look at suppliers. Okay, as you heard from Ting Ting, what's their data set look like? It's a bunch of quarterly data. The major feature there, the financial delinquencies, 3 categories: home mortgages, auto loans, and credit card loans. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Then, of course, Airbnb's presence or absence, and when did they enter, and et cetera. Standard socioeconomic variables, and the presence or absence of regulation. And again, when did that happen? Then, as Ting Ting mentioned, they've also got some additional data at the individual level on loan repayments, and they use propensity score matching. That's just basically a matching process. And then what do? It's basically multivariate regression analysis, where delinquencies are left-hand side variables, three separate categories, and then the important right-hand side variable is the presence or absence of Airbnb, and what difference does it make, controlling for other things, the socioeconomic, et cetera. And then additional set of regressions where they also include the presence or absence of regulation. They've got lots of robustness checks. That's always good. And then this, looking at those individual loan repayment patterns to try to capture what's the mechanism going on as to why Airbnb might be making a difference. And so what do they find? They do find that it does make a difference, especially for mortgages and car loans, not so much for credit card loans. The characteristics of the local areas, remember their unit of observation is the zip code, and so the characteristics of the population in the zip code will make a difference, and the presence or absence of state level and federal level homestead exemptions can make a difference. And then they look at the various kinds of local regulation, and they find that it does make a difference in undoing, in offsetting, in reversing some of those favorable mortgage or car loan delinquency reductions. And again, the type of delinquency matters, and local partisan Republican versus Democrat, and the vote in the national elections is their measure there. And then those patterns of host loan payments line up with the delinquency pattern. So there's a lot of consistency here. All right, so what are my comments and suggestions? First, I'd like to see more discussion. There's a lot of interesting results here, but I'd like to see more of trying to write why are the effects greater on mortgage loan, reductions in mortgage loan delinquencies, reductions in car loan delinquencies, less so for credit card delinquency. What's going on here? Why is that? Why is that so? Now, further, this is a more technical point, but the issue of endogeneity. Hey, Airbnb didn't just randomly decide to enter some zip codes and not others. There may well be a pattern to why they chose to go in earlier in some places, later in other places, and not at all in other places. And from an econometric perspective, if that is, it's not random, if it's systematic, there's a potential problem then in interpreting the econometric results. They do get around to dealing with that, but later in the paper, I'd like to see more attention to it and see it done earlier. The propensity matching doesn't address, trying to sort of get otherwise comparable zip codes doesn't address that. Then regulation. Regulation has come up a lot in the discussion today. And again, regulation is not a random event. It's even more so likely to be systematic, and I'd like to see that addressed. It's not addressed in the paper now. I think it does need to be addressed. I'd like to see more discussion of why different kinds of regulation have different effects on different kinds of delinquencies. Those results are there, but I'd like to see a lot more teasing out of those effects. And then lastly, and again, as Ting Ting pointed out, there are these different kinds of regulation, and I'd like to see more discussion of the need really to think systematically and to think about regulation in relation to local market failures. So in conclusion, really, this is an interesting creative paper. More attention should be given to the policy implications. More can be done with the data. And since this is a conference for young scholars, more research.
Thank you, Larry. We are coming up to 5 o'clock, and we do not want to be between you and the cocktail hour.
For sure.
So we want to take just 5 or 10 minutes for questions on this paper or also on the first paper. Any questions?
I would suggest you let her respond to the thought was we get a chance to do that.
Yeah,
Everybody else today got
sure.
I would give her this.
Would you like that chance?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Actually, I love all those comments. I think this is a great set of comments that I would also imagine my reviewer probably gave to me. And then to address the difference in terms of the different types of loan delinquencies. So has been a lot of study in the household finance literature that, especially for the Airbnb case, they need to hold on the property, right? So the mortgage is really important. And also for mortgage loans, there's a less if you're outside options. There's also a credit card debt puzzle, which is even though for example, credit card debt has a very high interest, but people tend to hold this type of loan longer than other type of loans, maybe because, they can, they want to keep the liquidity for use of other things. So I think, it's generally consistent with the literature that, they prioritize paying mortgage loan and then auto loan and then credit card loan. Yeah. And, so the second question, which is about the endogeneity, the entry of the Airbnb is not completely random. They probably select, for example, tourists tourism areas, right? And then you can, maybe areas that people would like to travel to. So that's a very good question. So we can do that probably by using some local head matching, which is matching the areas which Airbnb enter earlier than and compared to the areas that Airbnb enter later. So the idea is that these two, it's just the timing difference, but essentially these two neighborhoods are comparably, attractive for Airbnb to enter, and then similarly for regulation. But that's a very key point, which is, on the endogeneity. I think about the other negative externality and also the effects on Airbnb rivals or the pricing of the short-term rentals. I think those questions are very important. And then I think for antitrust practitioners, you probably definitely need to consider all those stakeholders. And then for us, we sometimes are constrained by, for example, the reviewers say you need to keep focus. So that's why we focus on the suppliers. But I do think, there's some empirical research on the entry of Airbnb has caused, for example, more competition for hotels, and then rising, has also led to the rising in the rents and also housing prices in the local areas. That has been shown, and also on the negative externalities, such as noise and safety issues for the neighborhoods. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. One question over here? Yeah.
Is not covariate balance, which the matching achieves. I think it's parallel trans assumption. Maybe you can use synthetic diff-and-diff. That's more like a newer technology. There's a paper by Akengaski and Ati and co-authors. Also, on the effect that you estimate, you seem to estimate an effect that...
Could you translate for
for
the rest of us what that comment means? It sounds very smart and interesting, but
so
I didn't understand.
the trends before the treatment have to go parallel. So it's not like if one goes like this and the other one goes like this, on average they're the same, but they're not behaving the same way as you see, right? So they have to go like this, or like this, or like this. So they have to go parallel. So the estimation is assuming that that's what happens. So you have to satisfy that somehow. Covariate balance, like matching, doesn't satisfy that. So my only other question was, it would be interesting to see effects at the intensive margin as well, because this is entry, it's an extensive margin. The rate of entry increases, that's has an effect on the rate of delinquency, because delinquency is a rate, right? So that would be interesting, I think. But cool paper, thank you.
To address the first question, I think you're definitely right that we need to make sure the the entered zip codes are comparable to the entered zip codes, so that we can make a comparison. You can use that as a control group. So we did test the parallel trend, which is that before the entry, the two zip codes actually are behaving, similarly. So the trend are the same. So make sure that they are comparable. And then thank you for the synthetic control suggestion. We will definitely try to implement that. We did that for another paper. For the second question, which is on the, what is the, the rates, yes. I didn't have in the slide, I hide it because there are so many tables. So we did try to look at the number of listings on Airbnb, and then the results are consistent, not just the binary, but the continuous variable. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I have a quick question about the regulation, because I think the regulation is coming in local governments. But when we think about home rentals, there's a bigger accommodations market where arguably there's two bigger companies than Airbnb, despite the market valuations, and that's Hilton and Marriott. So how should they think about sort of capture and how some of these regulations may actually be coming from hotels wanting to benefit from the lack of home rentals?
Which I think is happening in New York. Yeah, it's a big issue in New York.
So I would like to hear some of the law practitioners' point of view. Is that possible?
That's called lobbying. Yeah.
And it's not random, and you got to worry about it.
I don't know, Tom, if you have anything smarter to say than that, but.
I want to thank Kate for moderating the session. That's the smartest thing.
And thank Daniel for organizing.
Oh gosh, no. So your agenda says there will be closing remarks, but no one in the history of the universe at 5 p.m. on a Friday has ever wanted closing remarks. So instead, I will just say thank you to our presenters who've traveled and sort of shared these wonderful works in progress,
really great.
to the discussants, practitioners and academics and others who've come to share their perspectives, and to you, this wonderful group, for making such a wonderful conversation happen. Thank you all. And to Chiara and Nicole and the team who has created and curated this event.